Hi. So as I was reading Charlotte this week and listening to some of the other books I'm listening to, the question that was coming up for me in my head was the idea of how do we get children motivated to learn. It's a question that comes up all the time in education. It's a question that teachers are always thinking about. How do we make things interesting for children? How do we get them motivated to learn these things that we're forcing them to have to learn? How do we get them interested in this curriculum that we're imposing upon them? And so I think that maybe it's the wrong question. Instead of asking how do we get children motivated, because the question itself presupposes that children are not interested in learning. And when we actually take a look at children, when we look at them just from the time they're babies all the way up until they get into school, like the first few years of school, they still have this appetite to know. They want to know. Within the first 2 or 3 years of life, they master speaking a language, which is an amazing feat for anyone to learn within 3 years. That's, most people, it takes them 7 to 10 years to become fluent in a language, and these little children will do it within 3 years. They learn to walk, which is a really, really also a big, big accomplishment for these little people. And it's funny that, this question of how do we get them motivated, it's maybe the better question to ask would be, how do we step out of the way of children? How do we allow them the space and the time and the ability to learn things in their own way, to give them freedom, because they want to learn and they want to have knowledge for its own sake. And if we give them that freedom, they will surpass all of our expectations most of the time. In addition to Charlotte Mason, I'm also listening on Audible. I have read and really enjoy all of the work of a man named John Holt, who is said to be the father of the modern homeschooling movement. And the work that he has done is just, some of it is just so lovely. You just see how deeply he cares about children as persons. And it's very interesting that I think a lot of people who actually observe children, not doing experiments on them, like, trying to force them into boxes and taking out all the variables, but just observing them and watching the things that they do and how they grow and taking delight in them. So like Charlotte Mason and John Holtz, and I have not read a lot of Maria Montessori would be another one of those people, that all of these people who actually take the time to just watch children and learn and look at them and find them delightful, find them interesting, they all come to some very similar conclusions, I think. So it's very fun to sort of look at the work of John Holt and compare it to the work of Charlotte Mason and see that there's many similarities in the things that the conclusions that they come to. And one of them is that children are eager for knowledge. Children are just wanting to participate in life. And instead of, one of the things that John Holt says, instead of like not allowing them to use the tools that we adults use, is to teach them and train them, which is something the Bible tells us. We need to train our children to use things in an appropriate way. And children are more than happy. They want to learn how to use the tools that we have as adults. They want to participate in the adult realm and in our world. And we often, what Charlotte Mason would say, we despise the children. We look down upon them. We take away from their personhood. They are just as much persons as we are. And that's some of the work that John Holt has done, that there's so many so-called experts that will say that children are not capable of certain types of mental processes that adults are, but the work that he's done shows very obviously that these children are having these very advanced mental processes, that they're thinking in abstract ways, and that they're making connections that according to experts they shouldn't be able to make. And these are children across the board, all different kinds. And it's just very interesting to look at the work that he's done and see all these the wonderful types of connections that he's made. And Charlotte, I think, in many ways echoes him. And So I want to go back to that question of how do we motivate children, and the question is flawed because we're assuming that children don't care about knowledge, they don't care to learn, and we can see from very little on they want to do things. They want to be right there with mommy doing the dishes. They want to learn how to use the computer. They want to learn, but it's learning in a different way. So one of the things that John Holt talks about is that they take in a huge amount of data. They take in a huge amount of information. They want to take things as a whole before they start breaking it down into parts. And if we just allow them the freedom to mess about, just allow them to play with things and take the time to fantasize in their own way about things, and then when they're ready, they'll be very interested to sort of break things down. And a lot of times, if we just let them do it, a lot of the things that we would want them to find out, they'll find out on their own, whether it be in mathematics, whether it be in reading. So one of the examples that he would give would be a child that wants to learn an instrument. The first thing that he's done this, had this observation with multiple children, is he'll bring an instrument into the class. The one that he used was the cello, and the first thing that the children will want to do is after they watch him play a piece, they will go and try to reproduce what he's done. And they're not making the same sounds, but they are just doing the activity as a whole, as similarly to what he has done. And so they're getting all kinds of information about how does this work? How do I move the bow? How do I hold this? And they're not making the same music, but they are collecting a huge amount of data. And then from there, then eventually, once they've done that for a long enough time, they'll start to make some smaller and smaller distinctions and start to say, oh, okay, now if I move my hand this way on the strings. And he talks about the same example as he had a typewriter, and I don't know if you're old enough to, I remember from my childhood, I can still remember there were these typewriters where when you push a key, then there's a little thing that goes click, and the letter is on the end of it, and it'll hit, and then the letter has ink on it, and it hits the paper, and then if you press a bunch of keys at the same time, they'll all go up onto the page and they'll get jammed and stuck. So it's one of these very old types of typewriters that he had, and he would observe the children using this. And a lot of times what they would do is, the first thing that they would do is they would view it as, instead of thinking of it as something to write a letter or something to communicate to write on or to use words to communicate, they would think of it as a machine to make go, especially very young children under the age of 6. So they would want to make the machine go and do the same things that he was doing, make the same sounds that he was making. And so that was their first thing, that they would use this as a whole thing. They're trying to replicate the same thing that he is doing, even though they're not getting the same results. So they have a very different way of looking at the world. It's not like this where a lot of times we adults who've been through school, we have a very systematic, we have to start with just the basics and do one thing at a time, whereas children often will just grab onto things and do it a backwards way, where they'll be more interested in having to go to the most difficult thing first, and then from there, then go back into some easier steps. So that's, learning is not always this linear process that we think as adults we want to break everything down into these little tiny small pieces. And that's just not the way that children learn. And Charlotte Mason talks about that too in Home Education, where she says sometimes give children the big word, give them plum pudding as one of the first words that they read, because it's big and it sounds interesting and it's fun to say in the mouth, plum pudding, and rather than just having the tiniest little words and breaking everything down into small tiny things. And she spends a great deal of time in the book that I'm reading right now, Home Education. Is very interesting. And so she spends the portion that I'm reading right now has a great deal of time spent on practical ways to help children to learn different things. So like practical ways to teach reading, very practical ways to teach handwriting, and how to teach children to listening, comprehension, and being able to speak, which she calls narrating. So all of these are just really and beautiful ways to help children along in this in a very natural and easy way that will be interesting to them. But I think what I'm getting at is that the beginning of all of this is to grant the children freedom. And there's a few quotes that I want to read, and the first one I'm going to do is this one. She says that a child will have taught himself, and again, this is one of Charlotte Mason's 20 principles. One of her main 20 principles is that all education is self-education, and that would be something that John Holt would echo. He would say that it's when we allow children to just learn things on their own, for their knowledge for its own sake, rather than this way that we do it in school, where we force our ideas and how we think that it should be learned. We break it down. These are the steps. You can't go and read this big book. You can't go and do this math problem until you've learned all of these math facts. He has a great example in his book where he was substituting in a classroom, a grade school classroom, and so the teacher every day would have some math problems written on the board at the beginning of the day, where it was it was 2 digits, so it would be like 1 plus 7 or 6 plus 5, and it was these very simple math problems. And one day he came in when he was substituting and he forgot to write them on the board, and the children said, well, can we write the problems on the board? And he said, sure. And so at first they were just doing the simple problems that similar to what the teacher had done, but then after a few minutes they chose on their own to say, let's make this more interesting. And they started to do 2-digit numbers, and all of a sudden they were like, well, what if we start to do 3-digit numbers? We do hundreds. And he said that before they would write any of these problems on the board, they would discuss among each other and make sure that they could figure out what the answer was. And they would also often get into arguments over how to figure out the right answer and what the right answer was. And he would just not interfere with that. He would allow them to discuss that. And only would he do anything when they would come to him and ask him, okay, well, we cannot come to a consensus on how the right way to do this. What's the right way to do this? And so on their own, they began to do math that was far beyond the math that they were even expected to do that year. So they got into the addition problems that were far beyond what they had been taught originally to do. So our expectation of what children are capable of is often just we do what Charlotte Mason says, and we despise the children. We believe that they are so small and incapable of the things that we think are beyond their ability, which often is not true. And that's something I love about Charlotte, is that she talks about exposing children to these amazing ideas, these great things at very young ages. Read Shakespeare to them when they're very, very young. I mean, we used to do this in our country long ago, at the time when Mark Twain was writing. In his books, they had people going around do Shakespeare plays, and we used to do these things for that's what we would read. That was people would read back in the day. They'd have the Bible and a copy of some Shakespeare plays, and they would read this to the kids. And children, we do not believe that children are capable of this knowledge when they are, and often they're even more capable than we ourselves are to be able to understand the world, because they have less preconceived notions. They're more open. They're more able to they don't have already built in rules. They're more open to being able to think of different possibilities and different ways of doing things. But anyways, I want to get to some of these quotes that I had for you today. And this first one is that a child will have taught himself to paint, paste, cut paper, knit, weave, hammer and saw, make lovely things in clay and sand, build castles with his bricks. Possibly, too, will have taught himself to read, write, and do sums, besides acquiring no end of knowledge and notions about the world he lives in by the time he is 6 or 7. What I contend for is that he shall do these things because he chooses. And I think that is the key thing. So, I mean, this whole first half of the book is talking about giving children freedom, waiting until they are ready before we start to help them to learn things. Let's wait until they on their own, she says, can acquire no end of knowledge and notions about the world. They can teach themselves to read and to write. It's so funny that we have totally have total faith in our children that they can learn how to speak. We have complete faith. Most parents have no worries about their children learning how to speak. And when they start to say little babbly words, we don't, oh my goodness, he's never going to learn. We just encourage them. We're like, oh, you're so cute. You're so cute how you say and they'll participate in the conversation that and we'll answer and respond to them. We'll say, yes, you're absolutely right. I was thinking the same thing, even though we have no idea what they've said. We encourage them in their speech and we listen to them and we try to figure out what it is they are trying to say, and they learn to speak, which is a huge, much more difficult than it is to learn to read. But then once we get to the idea of a reading or doing math, and oh no, all of a sudden we have all these fears and anxieties and we're worried. Why? Why are we worried that children will not be able to learn if they can learn how to speak and they can learn how to walk and they can learn all of these things about the world around them? And just, if you think about how much it is that they learn within the first 3 years of life, it's astounding. We would never be able to do that if we had to learn in 3 years. We had to learn a new language, be proficient at a whole entire new sport that we had never done in our entire lives, and learn all of the things that children learn by the time that they're 2 or 3 years old. It's amazing the capacity that they have for knowledge. And this is what she says too, that we don't have to this is a really great quote. She says that a great deal has been said lately about the danger of overpressure, of requiring too much mental work from a child of tender years. The danger exists. So she's saying, it is a danger that we're trying to require too much of children before they're ready. So we're putting things on them that we don't need to put on to them. We don't need to have these, high expectations of them learning in the way that we need them to learn or that we think that they should be learning. But the danger exists, but it lies not in giving the child too much, but in giving him the wrong thing to do. And so we're not going to expect a 1-year-old child to know how to write numbers and how to add them, but it's not in giving him too much, because children are capable of amazing things, but it's in giving him the wrong thing to do, the sort of work for which the present state of his mental development does not fit him. Who expects a boy in petticoats to lift half a hundredweight? But give the child work that nature intended for him, and the quantity he can get through with ease is practically unlimited. Whoever saw a child tired of seeing, of examining in his own way unfamiliar things? This is the sort of mental nourishment for which he has an unbounded appetite, because it is that food of the mind on which, for the present, he is meant to grow. So children, and she says in other places that children are meant to learn within those first 5 or 6 years. They're meant to learn all that they're meant to soak up all the knowledge that they can get about their world with their 5 senses. They're going to go out and they're going to like stick things in their mouth. They're going to say, what, you know, what does this taste like? What does this feel like with their fingers? Like, you know, John Holt talks about speech and how there was a little girl who, she just wanted to go leedle, ah, just because it felt good in her mouth. It's just, what does this feel like? What can I learn about this? How can I figure this out? What can I look at that's around me? And if we just let them and take delight in them, and that's the other thing too, once we begin to, because in the second part of this book, she talks a great deal about like ways to teach reading and how we can go about teaching writing. But again, you know, we need to keep that in the context of what she's saying, that all of these things will be so easy. We don't need to help the child to be motivated to learn. The main thing is to wait, to give him time, and when he is ready, then he will eat up whatever we have to give him. And then also to keep his appetite whetted by keeping our lessons extremely short. She always talks about 5 to 10 minutes for lessons. And then and to make it, you know, just short and also something that he can use. So using real things. So we're not going to use this, what she calls twaddle, just baby. We're not going to baby talk to him. We're going to use poetry, you know, and we might just use nursery rhymes, but we're going to use real things in order to help teach him to learn to do math and reading and writing and to narrate. We're going to use real literature, real text. We're not going to try and believe that his intellect is so small that we need to dumb it down. And I think she's got a really great quote about dumbing things down. And this is a quote from the lady that taught Helen Keller. Helen Keller was a woman who was blind and deaf, and then she had a teacher. This is what she's quoting Helen Keller's teacher, Miss Sullivan, in this. And she says, "I don't want any more kindergarten materials. I am beginning to suspect all elaborate and special systems of education. They seem to me to be built up on the supposition that every child is a kind of idiot who must be taught to think, whereas if the child is left to himself, he will think more and better, if less showily." And so if we just allow children to have their own time to think, their own time to grow, their own time to be themselves, if we just give them freedom instead of always trying to impose our will and our control and our ideas onto them, just allow them to be free. Let them self-educate themselves to as much of an extent as we possibly can. And they can do it, and believe in them and have faith in them. You know, nowadays we have so little ability to trust ourselves because no one ever believes that we can do anything in school, in life. Everybody's so afraid. Everybody's so worried. Oh no, we will never learn to read. And when we do that, the children can feel that. They can sense that, oh my goodness, if mom thinks that, you know, mom didn't think it was difficult to speak, and so she trusted and believed that I could learn to talk, and so I did. It was so easy, you know, it was fun, it was interesting. I was watching people's lips and I figured it out. But now reading, oh my goodness, that's so different. That is so difficult because we adults, they catch our beliefs. They catch what we think about them. They catch that, we think that you are not smart enough. This is so difficult. And you are, you know, she talks about that we presuppose by the way that we treat them, by the way that we dumb things down. And we have the cat sat on the mat. You would just be too much of an idiot to understand anything except for the most simple, and even that, we need to dumb it down even farther. We need to have more and more pictures and fewer words, because you would not be able to understand it if we had it in any other way. And that is just so sad that we have such a low, we despise the children. We don't believe in them. We don't believe that they are capable of anything more than this dumbing down that we've done to all of our education. And we can see that kids more and more are, they believe us. They believe us when we believe this about them. They believe it about themselves. They catch our beliefs about them and they adopt them. And that, I think, sometimes is the saddest thing. And another thing I wanted to talk about in this video, even though I'm going a little bit far on time, is that the idea of another man named Raymond Moore. He's written a book. I haven't read it yet. It's one of the ones on my list, but he wrote a book called Better Late Than Early. And the premise, the idea in the book is that we just leave children alone. That if we let children alone and don't put them into school and just teach them how to be kind to one another and have good manners, we can just leave them alone until the age of somewhere between 8 and 10 years old. So we don't put them in school. We don't have any kind of formal education. We don't teach them anything until they're almost 10 years old. Then put them into the class, into 2nd or 3rd grade, along with their peers who have been through preschool and kindergarten and 1st grade and have struggled through all of this material. But we wait. We don't do that. We don't have them go to kindergarten. We don't have them go to 1st grade. We don't have them go to 2nd grade. We wait until maybe 2nd but 3rd grade. We wait, and then we put them into the class with their peers, and they will very quickly pick up all of the things that these other poor children have had to just struggle through for the last 5 or 6 years trying to learn, and they will pick it up just like that because they are ready, because they have the skills, they have the knowledge. And the children who we do this with, that when we wait until they are ready, that they are much better in the long run because their mental capacity is ready for the types of academic learning that we have in school. So it's just another thing that I just wanted to plant that seed. I'm gonna go, I had a couple of other quotes, but I'm just gonna go to the last quote that I have here, and that's that I think often, we don't only get in the way of our children in academics, but also I think a lot of times we get in the way of our children spiritually. And I think Charlotte Mason has a beautiful quote about this that I wanted to share. It says, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," says the Savior, "as if that were the natural thing for the children to do, the thing they do when they are not hindered by their elders. And perhaps it is not too beautiful a thing to believe in this redeemed world, that as the babe turns to his mother," I have to hurry up, "that as the babe turns to his mother, though he has no power to say her name, as the flowers turn to the sun, so the hearts of the children turn to their Savior and God with unconscious delight and trust." And so that's another way that we often hinder our children, is maybe forcing upon them, you have to believe what I believe, or you have to, and maybe it's just allowing them the space and the time to get to know God and grow in their own faith, and allowing them to come to Jesus and to come in their own time and in their own way, and giving them that freedom and stepping out of the way and not being a hindrance to our children, which I think so often, that's something that she talks about. It's so often that we are more of a hindrance and the more that we allow and give freedom and grant them that and secure for them, even though we have pressures coming from the outside, from our parents, from the school district, from our in-laws, pressuring us to control our children. And that can be so difficult to just say, no, I'm going to protect and guard the freedom of my children to learn, to grow, to come to their Savior. And so with that, I hope that this has blessed you, and I hope to see you in the next video.